You learn a lot about a person by the way they go quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the quiet that feels like a closing door. The quiet that feels practiced. The quiet that feels like someone who learned, long ago, that their emotions were safer unspoken. If you're here, you know this quiet. It's that moment in a relationship when something hurts, a dismissive comment, a forgotten need, an unfair expectation, and instead of speaking up, you swallow it. You let it settle somewhere in your chest. Heavy, but familiar. Because you didn't grow up learning how to express pain. You grew up learning how to avoid making it worse. Here's the dark paradox of quiet people in relationships. The very skill that protected you as a child is the thing sabotaging you as an adult. Silence used to keep you safe. Now it keeps you unseen. You've built an inner world full of depth, complexity, and emotional intelligence. But very few people ever get to witness it. Because quiet people don't suffer from a lack of emotion. They suffer from an excess of emotion with nowhere to put it. Every conflict becomes a threat. Every need feels like a burden. Every boundary feels like a potential loss. You don't avoid speaking because you have nothing to say. You avoid speaking because you've been trained to believe that your truth might cost you the love you're trying to protect. And so you enter relationships with a silent hope. Maybe this time, someone will notice without me having to say it. But they rarely do. Not because they're cruel. Not because they don't care. But because your silence is too convincing. Quiet people are masters of hiding the very wounds that need healing. This is the dark truth. And today, we're going to unravel it, slowly, gently, and honestly. Let's define the quiet archetype properly, not as a personality type, but as a trauma-shaped survival strategy. Quietness, for many people, isn't introversion. It's hypervigilance. A neurological state where your brain is constantly scanning for danger, conflict, or emotional shifts. Quiet people don't react slowly, they react internally. And this internalization is almost always rooted in three major psychological imprints. 1. Childhood emotional neglect schema. This is when you grew up in an environment where your emotions weren't responded to, not necessarily because your caregivers were abusive, but because they were overwhelmed, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. So your nervous system learned. Expressing needs doesn't work. Better not try. This becomes a lifelong blueprint. 2. Avoidant or fearful avoidant attachment. People with this pattern aren't cold, they're overstimulated. They learn that being vulnerable leads to rejection or conflict. So they develop a relational style built on distance disguised as calmness. They love deeply, but silently. 3. Parentification. This one is almost invisible but extremely powerful. If you grew up feeling responsible for the emotions of the adults around you, you learn to mute your own feelings. You become the stabilizer. The peacemaker. The one who absorbs tension instead of expressing it. In adulthood, relationships become unbalanced because you give too much, silently, and receive too little, silently. These patterns reshape the brain's default mode network, the system responsible for inner dialogue and self-perception. For quiet people, the default mode network doesn't ask, "What do I need?" It asks, "What will keep the peace?" This is why quiet people often appear calm but feel exhausted. It's not that they lack emotions. It's that they're carrying two lives at once. The outer self that maintains harmony. And the inner self that absorbs everything alone. Let's talk about the cost, the invisible grief that quiet people carry. Because silence has a price. A very heavy one. When you consistently prioritize peace over truth. Connection over honesty. And stability over authenticity. You begin to experience a subtle form of self-erasure. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But quiet people rarely receive this privilege. Instead, they learn to become who others need them to be. This is the philosophical tragedy of the quiet archetype. You sacrifice your voice to keep others close. And then suffer because they can't hear you. Let's name the core fear behind this. Fear of disruption. Conflict feels unbearable, not because you are weak, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to equate conflict with collapse. Fear of being a burden. Your needs feel too heavy, too demanding, too much. Fear of abandonment through authenticity. You worry that if someone sees the full extent of your emotions, they'll leave. These fears turn tiny daily moments into emotional minefields. You hesitate before texting back. You overthink whether your tone sounded wrong. You apologize for things you didn't do. You swallow emotions that deserve air. You endure small hurts because you're afraid the truth might break things. Quiet people live with a form of invisible grief. The grief of never being fully met, fully understood, or fully expressed. You don't just suffer in relationships. You suffer quietly in relationships. And that's the deepest pain. So how does this childhood pattern play out in adulthood? Let's map the symptoms, clearly, honestly, and gently. You may find yourself. These are not flaws, they are learned forms of protection. Relationship symptoms. You minimize your feelings before your partner ever gets the chance to dismiss them. You avoid conversations that feel emotionally charged, even if they matter. You choose partners who take more than they give, because you don't know how to ask. Self-worth symptoms. You interpret neutrality as rejection. You assume your presence is an inconvenience. You undervalue your needs and overvalue others. Career and social symptoms. You fade into the background, even when you deserve recognition. You rehearse conversations in your mind to avoid missteps. Boundary symptoms. You say, "It's fine," when it's absolutely not fine. You struggle to differentiate between keeping the peace and abandoning yourself. Emotional regulation symptoms. You shut down emotionally when overwhelmed, instead of reaching out. And throughout all of this, one painful truth remains. These are coping mechanisms, not personality traits. You didn't choose to be this way. You were shaped this way. The beginning of unlearning starts with one simple but difficult shift. Move from performing emotional safety to witnessing your emotional reality. Not judging. Not suppressing. Not justifying. Just witnessing. When you witness your own patterns, you stop gaslighting yourself. And for quiet people, self-gaslighting is often the loudest voice in the room. Now let's talk healing. Real, grounded, unromanticized healing. Because becoming less quiet isn't the goal. The goal is becoming less afraid of your own voice. Here are the paths that matter. 1. Inner child reparenting. You learn to speak to the younger version of yourself. The one who learned silence as safety. And you gently teach them that expressing needs won't destroy everything. 2. Shadow work. This means confronting the parts of you that you've hidden. Your anger, your disappointment, your unmet needs. Not to judge them, but to understand them. 3. Nervous system regulation. Quiet people often live in a state of freeze. A subtle form of shutdown. Techniques like grounding, breath work, and somatic release help your body learn that expression is not danger. 4. Choosing softness over survival mode. Softness is not weakness. Softness is the strength to remain open, even when old patterns tell you to close. Here's a quote to anchor this journey, from Rilke. Let everything happen to you, beauty and terror. Just keep going. No feeling is final. And remember this. Your silence was once a shield. But you're allowed to put the shield down now. You're allowed to be heard. You're allowed to take up emotional space. You're allowed to be whole. Because the goal is not to be fixed. The goal is to become whole. If this resonated with you, Share it with someone who needs to understand your quiet. And if you want more videos like this, you're welcome to stay. There's space for you here.